Welcome. My name is Shannon Morris. I am the Director of Operations here at the museum, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Throughout the month of March, we have been honoring the contributions of women in industrial history all over the world. Today, we are proud to present the stories of the women trailblazers of Bethlehem Steel, the Women of Steel. Perhaps there are other women in this room or women in your lives, like myself, that have their own stories about having a career in an industry dominated by men. These women before you made it possible for me and others like me to break into these industries. They are pioneers in every sense of the word. The Women of Steel project began when Bette Kovach, along with her team, Mary Lafferty, Ed Leskin, Bruce Ward, and Madeline Dundon, interviewed 19 women to learn more about their careers. These are the women you will see featured in our hall gallery exhibition today, and those stunning portraits were done by the very talented photographer Ed Leskin. We are deeply grateful to the women here today and all of those who shared their stories with us. As part of our program today, we're going to start with a panel discussion, and then we're going to view the documentary produced by the team. It gives me great honor to introduce Ms. Bette Kovach, who is a personal and professional inspiration to me. Elizabeth Bette Kovach worked in corporate and employee communications at the Bethlehem Steel Corporation from 1976 until the company's sale of assets in May 2003. Quite a career. She served as the last director of corporate communications. After Bethlehem, she went on to serve in roles in communication and publications for various international steel corporations. Bette co-authored Inside Bethlehem Steel, The Final Quarter Century, with photographer Peter Trooper. Bette is joined by our panelists today. We will be talking with Myrna Rivera. I'm sorry, I said it wrong, didn't I?
That's okay.
Lori Marx and Phyllis Kostura. And I'm going to hand this over to Bette.
If you can't hear me or can't see me, I don't care about whether or not you see me, because I'm really short and sitting right now, because I hurt my back a couple of weeks ago. But this is Myrna Rivera. I worked for Bethlehem Steel for 27 years, as Shannon introduced. I absolutely love my job. I graduated from Arabian College with a BA in journalism, and my senior year I had an internship. I saw everything flying around, and I was just incredibly impressed with the steelmaking process, and ended up making it my life's work of about 46 years. My last position was with American Metal Market, which is and was the steel industry standard for North American use and views. But this is an encore performance of an encore presentation of what the museum hosted for the Women of Steel project for Steel Weekend in September of 2024. As Shannon said, we interviewed 19 people, 2 of whom were interviewed the prior year, but the packaged video will air after this presentation. I want to keep it informal, just give you a little bit of information about the panelists, their own stories, and I'm going to briefly introduce each panelist. Myrna Rivera worked for Bethlehem Steel for about 30 years, came in the typing pool, left with 2 master's degrees. Phyllis Kostura. Phyllis Kostura worked for about 30 years as well, but in a very different environment. She was here in the plant as a member of Steam, Water, and Air, and consequently she stayed until the last operation closed in 1998, and that was the coke ovens. And then Lori Marx also came in a secretarial position, and she ended up severing from Bethlehem when Bethlehem sold, contracted out its information technology to EDS. And she just completed her career within the past year with 40 plus years working with IT. A common thread, and you'll hear it from each of the women, is they all took advantage of educational assistance, which was something that was offered to salaried people beginning in the 1960s and offered to hourly people beginning in the 1980s. And so there's a thread here of lifelong learning. Very different approaches to education and lifelong learning, but lifelong learning nonetheless. Am I keeping the microphone close enough to my computer? Okay, very good. So I'm going to start by asking Myrna, and if you pass the microphone down, why did you start working at Bethlehem Steel, and what were your various roles?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Myrna Rivera, and I was graduating from high school in 1972, Liberty High School. And at that time, the city of Bethlehem, Allentown, Lehigh Valley was booming. Companies came into the schools to test us because they needed employees. It was in May. I had Bethlehem Steel came, Mack Trucks came, the civil service came to test people, whoever wanted to take the test. And I was lucky enough to have passed all the tests, and I got job offers from Bethlehem Steel, Mack Truck, and I could apply for jobs through the civil service. Believe it or not, I decided to look at Bethlehem Steel and Mack Truck, and for the silliest reason that I thought Allentown was too far, because I'm a Bethlehem, you know, people from Bethlehem don't go to Allentown, people from Allentown don't come to Bethlehem. I chose Bethlehem Steel. And they literally pulled me out of school. My start date at Steel is May 22. So I didn't graduate till June, let's say 13th, but they let us start working half days. I wasn't the only one, there was a few of us because they were so hungry for workers. I did not start in the typing pool. Again, I was fortunate enough when I went to work, someone got sick in industrial relations and they said, would I be willing to replace her, which I did. And I started in industrial relations and would work half days, go to school until graduation, and then I kept working. In my mind, I wanted to go to college. Again, you have to remember in the 70s, I had an older brother and an older sister. And in our house, my brother was going to college. There was not a question. But my parents, in this time era, they, in their mind, said, why would we pay for her to go to college? She's just going to get married and have children. That's a waste of money. So it was never on our radar to go to college, even though I wanted to. So in my mind, I was going to work the summer, save enough money, and then go to college. I got the taste of money, which was very good for a young, I was 17 at the time, living at home. And I decided to take advantage, as Betty says, the tuition assistance program, which I decided to keep working and go to school at night, which for me ended up being the best thing ever because all of my education was paid by Bethlehem Steel. I started at community college, I got my associate's degree, I went to Cedar Crest, got my bachelor's degree, I was transferred over to St. Joe's University, got my master's degree, all paid for Bethlehem Steel and encouraged also. And also every certification I ever got through the certifying myself in human resources and employee benefits specialist was all paid for Steel. So I have a lot to be grateful to the Bethlehem Steel Corporation for giving me my education, which I value a lot.
Excellent. And Phyllis.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Kostura. I grew up in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, which was home of Lucan Steel, which later became part of Bethlehem Steel. I graduated in the late 60s and I tried to get into Lucan Steel. When I went over there, they told me I could take a test for typing and business machines, but I said no, I want to work inside the plant. And they said, no, you can't work in the plant, you're a woman. And my whole life, I listened to the steel. You know, from my bedroom, I would hear the things, the horns going off, and you would hear the machinery, and I wanted to see what was going on in that plant. And they said, no, you can't. And so I wrote on my application, I don't want to work in the office, I want to work in the plant. Well, I never heard from them. They wouldn't call me back. My mother had worked in accounting in Lucan Steel. My father had worked in Lucan Steel. I had several sisters that worked in there and a couple brothers. Now my sisters, of course, and my mother, they all worked in the offices. Well, I figured, I guess I'm not going to ever work for the steel plant. No, I moved up to Allentown, and a number of years later, they had applications for Bethlehem Steel. So I went and put my application in at Bethlehem, and I did get hired there. Now I was told,
Phyllis, can I ask a question? What year was that?
in the late 60s, when I applied for Lucan's,
No, when you got hired by Bethlehem.
79.
And that was after Equal Opportunity Employment Act, affirmative action. So the federal government was putting pressure on big businesses to hire women minorities.
Yeah, I believe that they were subsidizing it from the government too a little bit when we came in.
Uh-huh.
Right, yeah. And there was a lot of pressure they put on the plant for women to come in, so they weren't very well liked when they first came into the mill there.
What were the types of things that you either saw or experienced that indicated to you that women were not welcome?
Well, every so often you would be told that, you know, that you took a job from somebody else. Well, number one, every department had to advertise a job. If nobody took it in a couple weeks, then it was plant advertised. And after it was plant advertised for a couple weeks, and that meant anybody in the plant or anybody that was laid off could get that job, had to go for, that was already posted. Nobody went for that job. They offered it to the outside. I put in for that job, and that job was offered to me. So I never took a job for anybody, and anybody that ever said that I did, I pointed out, you could have had my job anytime, you know, but this is my job. So that's pretty much how I felt about it.
So tell us what you did in steam, water, and air.
All right, I worked in the boiler houses. I started out. We ran air compressors, we ran turbines, we ran the river pump houses and brought all the water into the plant. We were basically a utility for the plant. So we ran the gas lines, and so we followed the whole plant. Every gas line, every steam line, every air line, every water line, they were ours. We also were involved with the generators for producing electricity in the plant. So everything that, there wasn't any building or any operation that was denied to us for getting in and checking it out. In fact, that was your job. You had to go in and do those things. Okay.
And what were your favorite things about your job?
The favorite things about the job was that I got to see everything in the plant. When I first got hired, I was told that, oh, probably all the women were put in one little building, you know, and I thought, I don't want to be put in one little building with all the women. You know, I wanted to see what was going on. That was my whole purpose. I wanted to see, I mean, if you would go to the BOF, or you would go to the blast furnace, or you would go to some of the molds where they did it, and the foundries, and you would see how they were doing the different operations. It was so impressive. The trains going by, you would have the, I guess they were the Bell trains where they did the pours, and they also had the torpedo trains. It was so impressive to be involved and walking in amongst all that and working in those environments. So yeah, those were some of the things that I did when I was in the plant. But we also ran buildings. Air compressor stations, we'd have quite a few air compressor stations. At the river pump house, you brought in huge, gigantic turbines that we had that we bring all the water in from the river. But not only do we work with river water, we work with city water, we had well water, and we also had reservoirs and spring water. So we were involved with treating a lot of that water, and they would go to the boiler houses and we would create steam. Now, it wasn't like your steam from a teapot, you know, that's a saturated steam. It would be a live steam, and that ran an awful lot of equipment in the plant, plus the generators that created electricity. And one of the reasons why our department stayed so long is because there wasn't basically anything that ran without us providing the energy. And we were making money selling a lot of electricity back to the electric companies through the generators. We still probably could have kept working in our department, but for some reason they shut everything down in the Bethlehem plant here.
Before we pass over to Lori, one question for you that I thought it was very interesting, that you took advantage of tuition assistance.
Of what?
Tuition assistance.
Oh, yes, for school. They started offering programs, and in the very beginning, I started with the computer programs. They were just more like certificate programs. And then I went on to Penn State was offering a program, and we could actually do the studying on a lot of the programs inside. Well, it wasn't really on it was on the outside of the Bethlehem Steel, but it was Bethlehem Steel property. That the professors would come and they would teach you, and you would get your degree through that. Now that was for business and logistics. After Bethlehem Steel plant closed, I was given the opportunity to go to other education. So I went to the Allentown Business School, and I had a degree also in computers and networking. And but I also took a number of other classes that they also offered through Bethlehem Steel. Everything from computerized photography to health programs. There was a lot of programs that I took advantage of.
I remember when I met you, you said that you were surprised that very few people in the hourly ranks took advantage of that benefit.
That's true. I tried to talk to an awful lot of people to sign up. A handful of them would do it, but most people would said, no, I don't need it. You know, I'm going to be here for forever. Nobody thought that the plant was going to close. Now, ironically, when I did go over to Allentown Business School, there was about 5 or 6 men that I've never met before, that they all came from Bethlehem Steel, and they were taking the classes. And ironically, you know, they work so hard in the classes that the young kids will come in and they did not see the advantages of college. You know, they were more for fun and playing, and we were just really cracked down on learning as much as we could. But I really value those years of when I was learning there.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, Lori?
I don't know how to talk through a microphone. Is this okay? Hi, everybody. My name's Lori Marx, and I took quite a different career trajectory than the other women here. I had no desire to go to college, and my aspiration was to be an executive secretary. So back in the 70s, in high school, if you took the secretarial training, you basically could come right out of high school and you were all set with your typing, your shorthand, your business machine, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, Bethlehem Steel didn't make it up to Whitehall to do any testing while we were in high school. So initially, my dad and my grandpa both worked at the steel, and my dad did tell me my senior year, hey, you want to skip a day of school? Go put your job applications in at Mack Truck, Fuller Company, Bethlehem Steel, PP&L, see what shakes out. Well, didn't hear anything from anybody other than Lehigh University came into Whitehall, so I wound up in a secretarial position at Lehigh University. About 8 months after I graduated high school, the steel came a-calling, and I passed the qualifying tests and absolutely saw dollar signs when they offered the salary. I think it doubled my salary from what I was making at Lehigh University at the time, which I think was $2 and something per hour. I wound up in the teletype department, which was a division of telecommunications, and we typed telegrams as quickly as we could, all day, every day. We would get sales orders, claims, we'd get notifications when those mines were striking. We typed telegrams coming in from the vast locations across the country, shipyards, again, sales offices, claims departments, mines, and I spent the next 6 years trying to get the heck out of there because it got a little boring after a while. So fortunately, a job opened up in telecommunications for a stenographer. Still not the secretarial job I was dreaming about, but I actually got to use my shorthand. And what we did in telecommunications was we provided all the telephone services for the entire corporation. And Bethlehem Steel was so large, we actually had AT&T and Bell telephone offices over across the parking lot here in the headquarters building.
If I could inject something.
Oh. Oh.
To give you an idea of how big is big, we're all vintage 1970s. I started with the company in 1976. When I started in 76, the company had 106,000 employees across the country. We had steel plants on the West Coast, up and down the East Coast. We had shipyards. We had fabricating facilities, names that you don't hear anymore, like Buffalo Tank, Lane Middle Products, et cetera, et cetera. So the company was vast and coast to coast with a fairly healthy international export business as well. At the end of the day, when I put out the last news release that read kaput in early May of 2003, we were down to, listen to these numbers, 11,000 employees. We're supporting 74,000 pensioners and paying the medical bills of 120,000 people. You can't do that forever and stay afloat.
Okay, where was I? Okay, so I spent a couple of years there in telecommunications and a job opened up in Martin Tower, finally a secretarial position. So I actually went to work for a gentleman who was the general manager of operations in information technology. Spent a few years there, got a little bored, wanted to earn some more money. So once again, I talked with, I was in the right place at the right time. Along with my secretarial duties, I had been what they call the lead operator. And back then, they started bringing in office automation equipment. And they were looking for people to move into that field. So took another test, qualified, and I wound up in the office automation team and moved across the street. I'm not sure if y'all realize there was a little one-story building across the street from Martin Tower that housed information technology, as well as the computers that ran the company, basically. In 1992, Bethlehem Steel decided that information technology was too expensive, and they outsourced us to a company called EDS. One of the things that I want to mention is I did not take advantage of the tuition assistance, probably foolishly. However, Bethlehem Steel always made sure we were educated, so I was IBM educated. Anytime new equipment came in, anytime new software came in, they sent us to school. And much like we had AT&T and Bell Telephone on site for the telephone stuff, we actually had a pretty large IBM presence over in Martin Tower. Because the system was running on an IBM mainframe, and much of the software running on those systems was also IBM software. I was fortunate that once outsourced and the company started getting into trouble and going bankrupt, through the various steel companies, it was International Steel Group bought Bethlehem Steel, and then it was Mitchell Steel, then it was ArcelorMittal, and it was Cleveland Cliffs. I actually was kept on and actually wound up with a career of 46 years. Just retired in June of 2023, there are still, the Bethlehem plants are still operating under that new steel company. You've got a location in Burns Harbor, a plant in Steelton, Coatesville, and Conshohocken.
We could talk forever, and when we first did this presentation in September, we had 6 women on the panel, and I really had to keep it going along. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna ask one final question of each of 3 panelists, and then we'll go to the video, and then if you want, we can have some Q&A afterward. Anyway, if you could describe your X number of years with Bethlehem Steel into one word or one short sentence, what would it be? I will start it off. My job was an adventure. I never knew what a raining foam was going to bring, whether it was going to be a reporter from the Wall Street Journal wanting Bethlehem's comment on a new trade, popular topic these days, new trade situation, or it could be a plant town newspaper like the Baltimore Sun calling about a police scanner that they just heard that somebody was taken from the plant by an ambulance. That's the worst case scenario. It could be the top of the house looking for help on a speech, or it could be something fun like a speaking opportunity in a couple of weeks at a highly prestigious business organization. So my job was ever changing based on the needs of both the top of the house and in particular the media and general public.
I would say, I had to choose words. My career at Bethlehem Steel, 31 years, it was a learning experience. As I said to you, I was educated through Bethlehem Steel, but also, and people can find this negatively or not, I think Bethlehem Steel had some pretty amazing minds in the building. When you could criticize and say they had too many people, they should have outsourced this, they should have outsourced that. But it was so, for me, if I had a question, I could go upstairs and talk to lawyers in their office and sit down and not worry that it was $500 an hour. I would just go up, knock on the door. I can remember Kathy Mills and saying, Kathy, I have this problem, what do you think? And she'd sit down with me and explain it to me in my language, layman's terms, that I could understand and go back and be able to help defend it, write a letter about it or whatever. Not that she's here, but this woman taught me a lot. I used to have to write newsletters. Betty, you'll remember these because you probably banged your head against the wall. I am not a writer, so I had to write newsletters about healthcare, about wellness efforts and all this. And I would run down to Betty and I'd say, this is the gist of what I want to say. Can you pretty it up? And she would literally sit there talking to me and just scribble all over this newsletter and give it back to me. And it sounded like, somebody, it wasn't she put my words, which were, prescriptions. Like it was like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna have this, she made it flowery, she made it that people would read it, she condensed it that you wanted to read it. So I was surrounded by a lot of very intelligent people who helped me look intelligent. How does that sound? And then when I left Bethlehem Steel, close to shutting it down with you, I left April of 2003. I literally left Bethlehem Steel on a Thursday. It was Good Friday the next day, we had off. I started Monday with B. Braun Medical. And I can remember working there and someone asking me, more than someone, how did you learn about disabilities? How do you know so much? And I said to them, you can't learn this in a textbook. There is no book out there to teach you about short-term disability, long-term disability. There's no book out there. I learned this from the people that I surrounded myself with at Bethlehem. I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by very intelligent people who wanted to share their knowledge with you. I was very, very lucky to have that, and that helped me become the success at B. Braun. I ended up leaving there as the corporate vice president, but I have to tell you, it was under the knowledge of all these people that helped me have the knowledge that I have.
I guess the word I would use would be extraordinary. The places that I got to see and the people that I got to work with were so wonderful. Now, I know that they gave me so much responsibility. A lot of the buildings that I worked in and a lot of the operations I worked with, I knew held the steel together. If my operations that I worked with would go down, so did the steel. So they gave me a lot of responsibility on a number of things, and I think that would be my word, would be extraordinary.
I think my word would be people, just to build on what everybody else said. In IT, as you know, when a system goes down, you're not bringing that system up by yourself. It is a collaboration across many, many teams and many, many people. We became like family. You'd have a disaster recovery drill. You were in work, and this is way before technology is what it is today, where you can do your job from the comfort of your own home. We would be pulling 24-hour-a-day shifts where you stuck with that until you brought that system back up. Y2K. Once again, we didn't party like it was 1999. We were working. We actually covered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right after Christmas through the New Year. So yeah, and again, mentoring people, being mentored, that's so important. Because as Myrna said, you can't learn a lot of this out of a textbook. A lot of it just comes from experience and knowing that you're not alone, that there's somebody you can always go to for help. And then eventually you become the mentor down the road.
Well, those of us who are speaking today, none of us are spring chickens anymore. And I know when you look at your past, sometimes it's through rose-colored glasses. It wasn't always easy or pretty for a young woman to integrate herself and to find her niche within a highly paternalistic company that was very, very conservative. But there's no doubt in my mind that if I'd graduated from college in 1971 versus 75, I never would have been hired. But in that were opportunities to grow and develop and to mature, and opportunities to find your niche and to work hard to get good at it. And I think all of us did that. We're going to show the video now, and the video was conceived as part of Steel Weekend, which the museum holds every fall. It's a weekend dedicated to steel workers, the legacy of the company in this area and globally. This past year we focused on women of steel. And I know from my own experience, having worked for 2 other steel companies that went kaput, and then ending up working for a steel industry trade journal, I may not be a woman in steel anymore, but I definitely am a woman of steel. We interviewed 19 women. Total video footage was about 14 hours. And then there was a team of about 5 of us who edited it down to about 40 minutes. So we're going to run that video now, and afterward, if you have any questions, want to continue the discussion, we can do that for a couple of minutes as well. Okay, thank you for being here, and please come to Steel Weekend in October of next year.